Hey boot campers, welcome to gastroenterology. My name is David, Dr. Cornwell. I'm going to be taking you through gastroenterology and we're going to begin with embryology. If you haven't already checked out our embryology section, I highly recommend you do that. The function of this chapter is mostly to give you a bit of background about the normal embryology for gastroenterology, which we'll cover in our physiologic embryology video with enteric tract formation and then also gut divisions, and then talk about some of the common pathophysiology that occurs during the embryology for the gastrointestinal tract. That's going to include wall defects, tracheoesophageal defects, and then atresia and pyloric stenosis, and then finally we'll finish off with some of our pancreatic anomalies. So beginning our physiologic embryology video, the first thing that really happens in relation to the gastrointestinal system during embryology is what happens in week 3, which is the folding of the trilaminar disc. Now, the trilaminar disc is made of 3 primary things. Those are our ectoderm, our mesoderm, and then finally our endoderm. Our ectoderm is going to be our top layer here. Our mesoderm is comprised of 3 different real areas of mesoderm, and then our endoderm is going to be the bottom layer here. Now, I say those 3 different areas of mesoderm. The important thing that you need to understand for gastroenterology is that this most lateral portion of our mesoderm is the lateral plate mesoderm. And the lateral plate mesoderm, specifically the splanchnic portion, is going to form the mesentery for our gastrointestinal tract. Meanwhile, our endoderm, which is the yellow, is going to actually form the enteric tract itself. So this lateral plate mesoderm is going to spread downwards like so, and that is our splanchnic portion of the lateral plate mesoderm. Meanwhile, the somatic portion is going to come up like this. We can leave our somatic portion for the embryology chapter and instead focus in on this quick and dirty version with our splanchnic mesoderm here. So this ectoderm here and our mesoderm, this red here, and our endoderm are going to start to fold, with the ectoderm folding around like so. And the way that we're looking at it right now, you can kind of visualize already that these areas right here, as the ectoderm pinches together, are going to be our lateral plates. So in week 3, right here, this is what begins to happen. You begin to have the ectoderm folding around like so. During this time, you also begin to have the development of other structures in the body, but again, we're focusing on the gastrointestinal tract here. So the important thing to think about is this splanchnic mesoderm right here, and then inside here, this yellow is our endoderm. Our gut tube formed by our splanchnic mesoderm is going to be thinner, and as that canal, which is the vitelline or omphalomesenteric duct, continues to narrow, what's going to happen is that a portion of that endoderm that will eventually become the midgut is going to herniate out into the umbilical region through this vitelline duct. This herniation, which occurs in week 6, is notably just a herniation of the midgut. We're going to put a star right here in this midgut section. We're going to talk about what the midgut forms in a second here, but importantly, the foregut, which is here, and the hindgut, which is going to include the formation of our cloacal membrane, which goes on to form our anus, among other things, is going to be over here. Only the midgut is herniating through this vitelline duct. And as we move through our gastroenterology chapters, we'll continue to discuss how this midgut herniation can go wrong in a variety of ways during that week 6 herniation through the primitive umbilical ring. For example, when the vitelline duct fails to obliterate, you can get Meckel's diverticulum. You can also get other things, including a vitelline duct cyst, if it fails to obliterate in several portions as opposed to just failing to obliterate in one area. The midgut is going to herniate outwards because at the moment there's not enough room in the abdominal cavity for all of those midgut structures to continue to grow, and then in week 10 they're going to return into the abdominal cavity. I also want to highlight here that in week 8 the gut lumen is truly recanalized. In week 6, when you have the first formation of your enteric tube, there's no real lumen to your enteric tube, and that doesn't develop until week 8 when the gut lumen is recanalized. There's also other pathology that includes malrotation, when the midgut doesn't return and properly rotate 270 degrees counterclockwise around the superior mesenteric artery. The midgut rotates 270 degrees counterclockwise around the superior mesenteric artery in order to be framed properly in order to form the structure of the enteric tract in the future so that there's not a bunch of twisting of the intestine. Although it's a less testable detail than the rest of what I just described, it's also worth noting that during weeks 5 through 12, the enteric nervous system will develop and the cells will migrate. So during week 5, the cells are developing. By week 12, they should have properly migrated. The myenteric plexus has an edge in development over your submucosal plexus. So let's move on to what's very important for this chapter, which are 3 different gut sections. Those gut sections are the foregut, which is the esophagus through to the proximal duodenum at the ampulla of Vader. It's also worth noting that, like how the hindgut has the cloacal membrane, which will go on to form the anus, another portion in which the endoderm directly touches the ectoderm is the membrane from which our mouth is formed. Now we're going to go down our esophagus, reach our stomach, and then we're going to reach the proximal portion of our duodenum with our foregut. However, our foregut also goes on to make a bunch of other structures, including our pancreas, our stomach, our gallbladder, our liver, and our trachea. It's very important to note that the trachea and the esophagus are both formed by the foregut, and all of these different structures receive their blood supply from the celiac artery. The celiac artery, interestingly, also supplies the spleen, even though that is not a foregut structure. Our next gut area is going to be the midgut. This is the portion that herniated outwards during week 6, and then returned during week 10, and then twisted 270 degrees counterclockwise around the superior mesenteric artery, which is the blood supply to the midgut. So the midgut is the distal duodenum through to the proximal 2/3 of the transverse colon. So where we just started there, it's going to include the entirety of our small intestine, except for that portion of the duodenum formed by the foregut, and then it's going to include the cecum, the appendix, the ascending colon, and then 2/3 of the way through to the transverse colon right there. Now, interestingly, this is a very important area for watershed blood supply discussions because part of the transverse colon is supplied by the superior mesenteric artery. And now the rest of the colon is going to be supplied by the hindgut, so the distal third of the transverse colon through to the pectinate line of the anal canal. That is where the hindgut's contribution ceases. So we begin here, we go down, and then we end at the pectinate line. So the inferior mesenteric artery is going to supply our hindgut. This left upper quadrant corner, our splenic flexure, this is one of the most susceptible areas for ischemia because it is a crossover point for the inferior mesenteric and the superior mesenteric blood supply. That's it for the quick and dirty normal anatomy for gastrointestinal embryology. Again, I highly recommend checking out our embryology section, but before we move on to more pathologic embryology, let's very briefly discuss our key points here. Key points being that in week 3, the trilaminar disc composed of the ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm is going to begin to fold on itself. Our endoderm, our foregut region, our midgut region, and our hindgut region are what will go on to form our gut tract, our alimentary tract. This is a tube in week 6, and then in week 6, the midgut is going to herniate through the umbilical ring through what will go on to be the vitelline duct. The vitelline duct will eventually obliterate, but not before the midgut returns to the abdominal cavity in week 10. The midgut will then take a rotation. We'll talk about what happens if that rotation goes wrong in later videos. Very important to understand is what the foregut, midgut, and hindgut go on to create, because understanding the origin of these structures will help you in later videos when we talk about anatomy. Our foregut is going to include our esophagus, our stomach, all the way down through to our proximal duodenum. There's a portion of the endoderm that contacts the ectoderm that will go on to form the mouth, but importantly, the esophagus through to the proximal duodenum, ending at the ampulla of Vader, is what is made by our foregut, and that includes our pancreas, our stomach, our gallbladder, our liver, and very importantly, our trachea. Then our midgut is going to go on to form the majority of our small intestines, all the way through to 2/3 of the way through our transverse colon, and our final section is going to be our hindgut, which makes up the distal third of the transverse colon, and then the rest of the colon through to the pectinate line of the anal canal. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.